So in this tutorial we are going to be creating this geometry nodes animation. So I hope you're ready for it, and let's get started straight away. So first of all, I am going to delete this light and I will click on the cube, bring this upwards and turn this into a geometry node editor. Click on new and I will actually delete this and make sure that we have a grid. And on the grid we can spawn different lines. So I'm going to make an instance on points node because we want to instance some things on the points of this grid, and it will be a curve line. And this curve line will be instanced on the grid, like so. Now, in my specific case, I don't want a three-dimensional layer. I actually want it to be only one. So what I can do is set the vertices x to 1. And that will make sure that we only work on the y. So I'm going to set the size on the x to 0 because we don't need it anyways. And I'm going to set the size on the y to 5. Like this. Now we only have 3 vertices on those 5 meters. So I'm actually going to turn this into 20, and that will make sure that we have more of those lines on the grid. Now we can determine how long this is. I actually want it to be a bit longer. I'm just going to do 5 for now. Very specific reason for that is that we now have a 5 by 5 plane. So if we add a plane, RY 90, let's scale this up like so. If I now bring this up, it should be the same size, and that is the case. So we have a perfect square, what I'm trying to say. And now I want to make sure that the curve actually is wavy. In order to do that, we are going to make use of a wave texture. So I will add a set position node. This will be placed right over there. And now we need to offset this. Of course, if we offset it like this, well, nothing kind of happens now, does it? So we need to specify where the offset is supposed to take place. And in order to do that, I will add a wave texture, and this wave texture can be plugged into the offset. Now, nothing happens. Why is that? Well, it's actually quite simple. We only have 2 vertices on this line. So there's only 2 dots in space, one over here and one over here. So nothing in between can be manipulated. So what we should do is press Shift A and resample the curve, because we want to determine how many points are between point A and point B. How many of them are there? So let's do this and increase the count. We can go into the wave texture and set bands to rings. Starting to look a bit more interesting. I want all the detail and stuff like that to go to 0. And if we look at the phase offset, it is doing its little curly thing. But what I find to be very annoying is that it's going into the positive. So this is positive. And then it's going into the negative again. And then into the positive, into the negative. I don't like that. I actually want it to be a smooth wave. So how can we do that? Very simple stuff. We have to isolate a certain axis on which this happens. Let's add a separate XYZ node. I'm going to plug the color into the vector, and then we need to have a combine XYZ node, because as we are able to see, this is a float. It's going into a vector diamond. So we need to make sure that we have a vector diamond for the vector diamond to be completely happy. And wow, now it has been solved. We have no positive, negative. So at first it was going like this, kind of like the graph of your favorite cryptocurrency. Now we also want to make sure that we can manipulate how far the amplitude of the wave can get. So this is the frequency, is the amount of waves that we have in between those points. And if we increase the scale, we get a higher frequency. But we also want to be able to manipulate the amplitude. So let's do that right now by adding a map range node. And where should it be added? Should it be added in the vector? No, it should be added into the float right here. Now let's play around with the from min and from max right over there. And you can control the amplitude with the to max value and the from max value. So do whatever you want. You can set this to 1, for example, and then play around with the to max, which is going to be lower. Something like this. Awesome. So now we have waves that make sense, but I don't think that this amplitude is enough. I want there to be more. Increase the scale until I get to a point where I'm like, yeah, I guess that's good. There's something like this, but it's becoming very choppy. And that is because we don't have enough geometry to work with. So let's increase the resample curve. So now we have a pretty cute looking wave going all the way around this. And I want to make sure, and now I want to turn this into something that can be animated first. So I'm going to make sure that we add a trim curve node. And this trim curve allows us to animate this value. Now, just to be clear, I want to have this in the modifier stack as well, so I don't have to go into each geometry node setup all the time and play around with this. So I'm going to simply add a group input. And I'm not even going to name it, because I'm not in the mood. I'm simply going to plug it into end. And there you have it, end. So now I can animate it from the modifier stack instead of having to go into the geometry node editor every single time. So let's turn this curve into something tangible, something that the viewport can display. So let's add a curve to mesh node. And we need to specify what type of profile this curve has. So let's also add a curve circle, because we want to have, well, like a circular type. So curve circle, let's decrease the radius by a bunch. And what do we have here? A very cool looking wave type pattern that's turned into a mesh, which we can animate using the end value. This is going to be a tricky one, by the way, because we have very little control over the frequency in this. Now, what we want to have is something that comes from the other side as well, but we have a frequency problem. So what that means is that right here we have 20 lines. If I duplicate this and rotate it around, we still have 20 lines, like so. But if we count the frequency on this, we have very little control over the frequency because we are using a wave texture with a scale output. So it's not like we can say, oh, give it a frequency of 10 or 20 or something like that. We are playing around with the scale and getting something. So that's a problem. And the way to fix this is to have full mathematical control over the amount and frequencies that we are working with, so that we can simply type in the numbers. That's what it all comes down to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this wave texture type stuff, but I'm going to keep the combine XYZ. So first of all, you want to add a position node, and we're going to plug this position into a distance node. This is a vector node. You can see that it's purple. And then we'll add a mad node set to add. We're going to add the distance, and I'm going to plug this into the x-axis and the vector into the offset. So I'm going to duplicate this and add a multiply node. And this really doesn't do that much either, but it starts to make sense once we duplicate this again and add in a sine, and not the sine as in like a drawing, but the sine as in a sinusoidal wave, like this. All right, so now we have a sinusoidal wave. And the multiply right here determines how many waves we have. So look at how cool this looks. Now, this is the frequency determinator. So let's set this to 5, for example. Let's turn add, set it to 1, just to keep the values normal. And all we have to do is set this to a, and now we can check the value, so it's 6. Let's have a look. It's probably going to be 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, so that's the case. Let's set the value to 12. I'm going to count it again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Awesome. Now, naturally, we also want to have control over the amplitude, not only the frequency. And a very simple way to do that is simply by duplicating this multiply node, bringing it right behind it. And now the amplitude is going to be magnified by 12 times. But if we set this to 0.3, it will be a very normal looking amplitude, something like this. Now, what does this mean? What actually changed? We have the very same result. What changed is that we now have control over the values. If we play with this multiply, now I know that 5 is actually 6, that 12 is actually 10, stuff like that. Which means that I know exactly how many lines I have here, instead of using a randomized generator like the wave texture. So we just made it a bit more simple for ourselves, simply by adding this simple node setup. And by the way, this node setup is genius. You're probably going to use this a lot. Let's make a group input. Group input, let's plug the multiply value right here. Let's open up the end panel. We have value, and this is the frequency. Wave frequency. All right. Then I'm going to do the wave amplitude. Wave amplitude. Frequency is how many times it occurs, and amplitude is how high the wave is going. All right, so now we have those here as well, which means we we have a wave and it can be animated using the end slider. So I'm going to set this to 24. Well, because now it should be the case that we have 20. So this should probably make it possible to interlock these without problems. So Shift D, RX 90, GZ 2.5, GY 2.5, make it exactly in the middle, G and Z, G and Y. Forget about the amplitude, we'll fix that later. The frequency has 20, we have 20 lines, so now they fit in with each other perfectly. That is great. We solved the problem mathematically. Awesome. Now I'm going to select this, Shift D, SX -1, and bring it over to this side. And then I'm going to take this one, Shift D, Z, bring it over there, SX -1, G and X, and let's move it backwards ever so slightly. So now we have this interlocking pattern, which looks very cool and it is perfect. I love this. I love that it's perfect. And now we need to make sure that all of these are placed correctly. So let's G and X this and make sure that everything is placed in its respective position. That makes sense. In theory, if I select all of these, let's do that, hold Alt and animate the end function, then they should all interlock into each other. So let's have a look at this animation. There you go. And it is interlocking perfectly with each other. Now, of course, you can also play around with this in the timeline. I'm going to set this to cycles. You can go into the graph editor and change the speed of these animations. So maybe you want it to come fast in the beginning, then slow down for a while, and then go fast out of the frame again. That is definitely something that you can do. So now all that's left to do is add an HDRI. Let's give it a black type of texture. Let's go into the geometry node editor. Right here, add a set material node and give this a material. And the material is obviously going to be black and maybe metallic, slightly less rough. That's basically it. Now I've shown what I wanted to show, and you can make any type of animation you like with this. Have some fun with it. And now, of course, this is supposed to represent the part of the microphone right here, which is being built up. And I'm going to zoom out of that. And then at the same time, I will zoom out of the actual microphone. So it's kind of a little trick, a little hack in order to make sure this entire thing flows. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, click on subscribe and I will see you in the next one.